along the fog-kissed shoreline of Astoria, Oregon, where seagulls cry above rusted docks and the morning tide rolls in heavy with salt and secrets. A retired German shepherd stands frozen at the edge of the harbor. His ears twitch, his eyes fix on a silent container, and deep inside it, unseen, unheard, a young Coast Guard officer is tied, gasping and fading. Her name is Elena. She's only 23, and time is running out. Before we begin, do you have a dog of your own? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to know who's watching alongside their furry best friend. And if you believe that no animal or human should ever be left behind in silence, hit that subscribe button, because today's story may just change the way you see loyalty forever. The morning mist lingered low across the port town of Astoria, Oregon, wrapping the wooden piers and rusted cranes in a hush that only the sea could command. Seagulls wheeled overhead in slow, lazy arcs, and the scent of brine, oil, and wet rope soaked the air like an old story being retold. It was early spring, cold enough for breath to fog, but not enough to keep the boats in harbor. Beneath the veil of quiet beauty, however, something had begun to shift, something too subtle for most to notice. But not for Elena Brooks. Elena, 23 years old, had the quick athletic gait of someone who ran every morning before the world stirred. She stood 5'7", with sun-worn cheeks, dark chestnut hair tied tightly at the back of her head, and ocean gray eyes that missed nothing. She had joined the Coast Guard straight out of community college, driven by both duty and a personal ache. Her father, a naval engineer, had vanished during a ship escort mission off the Alaskan coast when she was 13. Since then, Elena never allowed herself to look away from the currents of danger others tried to ignore. Today, her boots echoed along Dock 14 as she reviewed a clipboard of incoming cargo vessels. Her uniform was crisp, the blue sleeves rolled to her elbows, and a service pistol rested snugly on her right hip. She wasn't supposed to be on duty this early, but she'd noticed discrepancies in cargo manifests over the last 3 weeks. Certain ships docking for mere minutes, containers unrecorded, names that didn't appear in the maritime database. And as someone who had grown up with the ocean in her lungs and suspicion in her gut, she knew the tides weren't right. On a paper marked confidential, she underlined a vessel name, MV Resolute, inbound from Hong Kong, registered under a now-defunct shell company. She narrowed her eyes. It had slipped past customs 3 times this month. "Not today," she whispered, tucking the clipboard under her arm. Meanwhile, on the edge of a quiet street 3 blocks from the harbor, a different kind of instinct was stirring. Buddy, a 13-year-old German shepherd with grizzled fur and worn-down joints, stood on the porch of a weathered 1-story cabin, shaded by wind-bent pines. His coat, once a proud sable and tan, now carried the silver of long years and too many memories. His eyes, though faded with time, still held the amber alertness of a soldier not yet dismissed from duty. He stood rigid, hackles rising as he stared into the direction of the docks. Walter Jennings, 72, emerged from inside wearing a wool cardigan with frayed sleeves and faded jeans tucked into old military boots. Tall but slightly hunched from age, Walter had the sturdy presence of someone who never left a promise unfinished. His hair, once black, was now mostly steel white, and he wore thick-rimmed glasses perched precariously on his nose. Walter had been a K-9 handler in the Marines, and later trained search and rescue dogs for over 3 decades. Buddy had been his finest partner, and his final one. "Easy, boy," Walter said, watching Buddy pace the porch boards with rising unease. "Ain't nothing out there but wind and waves." But Buddy wasn't convinced. His ears flicked toward the distant creak of cranes and the hum of tugboats, and then he gave a low growl, deep and rolling, like the kind he used to make before charging into the unknown. "Something wrong?" a voice called from the sidewalk. It was Liam O'Connor, a freckled 12-year-old with tousled ginger hair and a skateboard tucked under one arm. He was the neighborhood's unofficial scout, always observing, always questioning. Liam lived next door with his grandfather, and often hung around Walter's porch to ask about war stories and old dogs. Buddy didn't respond to Liam this time. His tail was stiff and his nose lifted, sniffing something the humans couldn't detect. Back at Dock 14, Elena had made her way behind a row of storage units, following a noise she couldn't quite place. Something metallic, something out of rhythm. She rounded a corner and stopped short. A shipping container, unmarked, matte gray, No tracking code, was perched oddly between two cranes. The lock looked freshly welded. She reached for her radio. That's when the needle of dread pricked her spine. A sound behind her, a shuffle, then darkness. Two shadows surged forward. One clamped a rag over her mouth, the other grabbed her arms. She fought, twisting, landing a sharp elbow into a rib cage, but it wasn't enough. The chemical on the rag burned her nose. Her limbs turned to water. As her vision blurred, she saw the container's doors yawn open like a tomb. Then silence. Hours passed. The sky above the port shifted to steel gray as the wind picked up. Rain tapped the metal roofs of the buildings with the gentleness of an approaching storm. Back at the cabin, Buddy was pacing now, his claws clicking the hardwood like clock hands counting down. Walter tried calming him with a soft pat, but Buddy jerked away and stared at the door. "You haven't been this wired since Kuwait," Walter muttered. He followed Buddy to the porch and looked out toward the sea. The smell was different now, something electric, charged. Walter leaned on the railing, unaware that far beyond the trees, inside that locked container, a young officer lay unconscious. That somewhere between salt and silence, instinct had been stirred, not by sirens or radio calls, but by a bond older than logic and far more precise than fate. The darkness was thick and metallic, the kind that clung to the skin and pressed into the lungs. Elena Brooks stirred slowly, her head pounding with every heartbeat. Her wrists were raw, tied behind her back with coarse zip ties, and her mouth tasted of copper and dust. The air was hot, dry, and stale, with only the faintest breath of wind squeezing through the container's top vent. A thin shaft of light spilled in from a small gap above, barely enough to see by. She tried to sit up, but her limbs rebelled, numb from being contorted too long. She blinked, trying to stay conscious. "Focus," she whispered to herself, voice cracking. The walls around her were grooved steel, and the floor vibrated slightly, telling her the container had been moved recently, but was now still. Her Coast Guard uniform was stained with sweat, and her utility belt was gone, stripped from her during the ambush. Somewhere beyond the metal, muffled voices drifted in. Elena turned her head toward the sound. Two men. One had a gravel-thick voice, lazy and sure of himself. The other was sharper, impatient. "Shipment goes out tomorrow, then we're clear." And the girl? Still breathing. Long enough to miss the boat. That's all that matters. Elena's heart skipped. She memorized every word, straining to match the rhythm of their movements with the sound of footsteps outside. If she was still near the docks and the container hadn't been moved far, someone might find her. But who? Back on Pinewood Avenue, just beyond the old shipyard fence, Buddy stood rigid in Walter's backyard, tail stiff, ears up. The old dog had refused food that morning, pacing instead along the southern edge of the fence, occasionally growling low in his throat. His nose twitched toward the direction of the bay, like a compass only he understood. Walter watched him from the porch with narrowed eyes. He held a chipped mug of black coffee, steam curling into the morning chill. He didn't speak, just studied the dog, weighing instinct against logic. Buddy had always had a gift for sensing things, trapped hikers, gas leaks, even one time detecting a heart attack in a stranded tourist. But this was different. This wasn't fear. It was urgency. "Go on, boy," Walter muttered finally. "Show me." But before he could open the gate, a voice interrupted. "Hey, Mr. Jennings!" Walter turned to see Liam O'Connor jogging up the sidewalk, his red backpack bouncing against his back. The boy was short and lean, with expressive green eyes and a tendency to ask too many questions. Today he wore a navy hoodie 2 sizes too big and sneakers scuffed from skateboard falls. "I saw Buddy barking all night. Something wrong?" Liam asked, glancing at the German shepherd now pawing at the ground. Walter hesitated. "He's restless." Liam's eyes lit up with curiosity. "Can I come, if he's going somewhere?" Buddy let out a sharp bark, turning toward the edge of the property. Walter sighed. "Stay close, and don't touch anything. That dog knows more about survival than both of us combined." The trio made their way past the alley behind the marina warehouse. Buddy walked with his nose low to the ground, tail flicking as he traced an invisible thread through puddles, oil stains, and trampled reeds. Meanwhile, inside the steel box, Elena pressed her ear to the wall. The men's voices had faded, but she picked up a new sound clanking, like chains or weapons. The realization hit her like a wave. They weren't just smuggling goods. They were moving weapons and perhaps people through Astoria's international port. The container was likely a holding cell, one of many. That explained the unregistered ship names, the sudden docking and leaving patterns she'd flagged. Elena gritted her teeth and began working her wrists against the zip tie. The pain was immediate. Blood smeared her palms, but she welcomed it. Pain meant she could still feel, and as long as she could feel, she could fight. Back outside, Walter and Liam followed Buddy past an old chain-link gate. Liam nearly tripped over a half-buried mooring post, but caught himself. "He's going toward the freight yard," the boy noted, panting. Walter didn't answer. He was watching Buddy's behavior closely. The dog suddenly stopped near a pile of rusted anchors, sniffed, then growled low and spun in a tight circle. "That's a signal," Walter said under his breath. "That's a find." He pulled out a flip phone, a dusty relic from his military days, and pressed 2 buttons. A custom GPS ping attached to Buddy's collar lit up, sending a faint signal back to the Coast Guard's long-range K9 tracking database. Walter didn't know if it still worked. He hadn't used the function in years. "Come on," he said to Liam. "We might need help." Inside the container, Elena finally slipped one hand free. Her knuckles were swollen and raw, but adrenaline kept her focused. She used a metal edge on the container wall to saw through the tie on her ankle. Every movement echoed through the steel walls like a bell. She froze. Outside, one of the men had paused mid-step. She held her breath. "Thought I heard something," the voice said. The footsteps receded. Elena exhaled slowly. Her pulse thudded against her ribs, but she forced her mind to stay clear. Her best weapon now was information. Names, faces, ship numbers. She would remember it all. Outside, Buddy sat down abruptly in front of a single gray container, one that stood apart from the rest, its lock newer than the rest of the row. He sniffed once, then twice, then he growled. Walter's breath caught in his throat. "That's it," he said. Buddy barked once, sharp and focused, then again, and again. Inside the suffocating steel walls of the container, time seemed to dissolve into a blur of pain, thirst, and memory. Elena Brooks leaned against the grooved wall, her fingers trembling as she traced the crusted blood on her wrist. She had freed herself, but escape wasn't yet possible. The container lock was thick, reinforced from the outside, and she had no tools. The silence wrapped around her like a cold sheet, broken only by the occasional hum of wind brushing against the thin air vents. Yet in that stillness, her mind drifted not forward, but backward. Her father's name was Martin Brooks. He'd been a Navy logistics officer, quiet and methodical, with warm eyes the color of deep coffee and the kind of laugh that didn't show up often, but when it did, it made you feel like everything was going to be okay. Elena remembered the last time she saw him, her 13th birthday. They had gone fishing off the coast near Rockaway Beach. She'd caught a trout the size of her arm and insisted on keeping it even though they'd both agreed to release everything. He let her win. He always did. Weeks later, he vanished during a classified escort mission, presumed lost at sea. No wreckage, no radio signal, just a folded flag and a closed casket funeral. Elena didn't cry at the ceremony. She hadn't cried for 3 years after. But that silence grew inside her, shaping everything she would become. It was her father's medal, found in an old cigar box beneath his desk, that made her apply to the Coast Guard Academy. "Service over safety," the inscription had read. At age 19, she had carved that motto into her locker. Now, 4 years later, trapped and exhausted, she repeated it like a whisper against the dark. Service over safety, service over... A sound outside cut her short. Not a footstep, a bark, muffled but sharp. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back. "Please," she breathed, unsure if she was hallucinating. Miles away, Walter Jennings knelt beside Buddy at the edge of the container row. The sky had gone a deeper gray, clouds sagging low, the smell of rain now undeniable. Walter's face was set in that rare kind of seriousness only soldiers shared when the stakes were life or death. He ran his fingers under Buddy's collar and flipped open a panel embedded inside the thick, leather and old black device with a single cracked button and a corroded screen. "Let's see if this thing still talks to someone," Walter muttered. The collar's GPS module had been standard issue for Marine K-9s deployed after 2005. It could ping a frequency to a decommissioned Coast Guard satellite system if, by some miracle, the signal tower in Newport was still up. Walter hadn't used it in nearly a decade. Behind him, Liam fidgeted. The boy's freckles were flushed red with anticipation, and his green hoodie was now stained with oil from brushing against one of the containers. "Is this like a dog radio?" he asked. Walter gave a short grunt. "Something like that. If anyone's still listening, this'll get their attention." As he spoke, Buddy let out another bark. This time louder, almost urgent. He was staring at a vent near the base of the gray container, nostrils twitching. Then, unexpectedly, he lay down in front of it, head resting against the steel like he was guarding something precious. Walter's brows furrowed. He gently pressed the GPS button. Inside the container, Elena heard it again. The bark, then a second, then silence. Then, a metallic click. A tiny chirp from above, like a signal. It wasn't loud, but it was real. She jolted to her feet, scanning the upper corner near the ceiling vent. Her heart kicked wildly. She recognized the sound. She had heard that same beacon tone in K-9 training exercises 2 years ago, when practicing K-9-assisted search and rescue missions. Only one kind of caller made that exact pattern. She looked around the container. No one was outside. They hadn't come back yet. And the dog? If it was a rescue dog, it had to be someone's. Someone trained. Which meant someone was coming. She fell to her knees and shouted hoarsely toward the vent. "I'm in here! Help! This is Officer Elena Brooks. I'm alive!" The wind outside picked up. Walter strained his ears. "Did you hear that?" he asked, standing upright. Liam nodded slowly. "I think so. Someone's inside?" Walter didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone, an ancient flip model reinforced with a rubber case, and dialed an emergency number still saved under Coast Guard Command, Astoria. Back when Walter retired, they told him the line would only be monitored for 10 years after. It had been nearly 12. He called anyway. On the 4th ring, someone picked up. A woman, calm and sharp. "Astoria Command. Identify yourself. This is Walter Jennings, former K-9 instructor, Marine Unit Bravo 75. I've got a retired unit on site. Positive alert on trapped personnel. Repeat, positive alert. Request immediate response." The pause on the other end was brief. "Location?" the voice asked. Walter read out the coordinates from the GPS collar, and the line clicked off with a single word. "Copy." Beside him, Buddy stood again, tail wagging once, then stilling. His ears rotated toward the container. Walter looked down at him. "You sure about this, old man?" Buddy didn't move. He just stared at the door like he was waiting for someone to open it. The first raindrops fell like whispers on the tin roofs of Astoria's warehouses. A distant rumble echoed off the coastline, low and rolling like a warning from the sea itself. Storm fronts moved fast in Oregon this time of year. One moment, the sky was a blanket of gray. The next, a wall of wind and water. But there was no time to wait it out. Buddy was already moving. He broke into a sprint with surprising speed for his age, paws kicking up gravel and water as he tore across the container yard. Walter Jennings, soaked to the knees, didn't try to catch him. He knew better. Instead, he turned to Liam, whose ginger hair was plastered to his forehead by rain. "Stay behind me," Walter barked. "I brought this," Liam said, pulling a weather-beaten handheld radio from his backpack. "It's my grandpa's. He said it could reach the patrol frequency if I stayed on Channel 3. Walter didn't question it. The boy had proven to be more than just a curious kid. He was resourceful and, more importantly, brave. He nodded and motioned toward a row of covered crates as the wind picked up sharply. "Let's get under there. I need a clear signal." The storm intensified fast. Raindrops turned needle-sharp, the wind howling like something alive. It screamed through the alleyways of stacked metal like it was looking for someone. Lightning cracked across the bay, casting brief white fire across Buddy's path. But the old dog didn't flinch. He had found his target, and something inside him, perhaps muscle memory, perhaps something deeper, knew the job wasn't over until the mission was done. Meanwhile, inside the container, Elena Brooks could hear the storm's rage. Thunder boomed above like steel drums. The walls vibrated from the wind. But what made her heart leap was the sound just outside, a dog's bark, sharp and urgent. then again. Someone was close. And now she had no doubt. It was a working dog, and it knew exactly where she was. She stood, pressing her palms to the inside of the container, trying to bang a rhythm against the wall between each gust of wind. "I'm here!" she shouted again and again, though her voice cracked in the wet air. Back under the makeshift cover, Walter crouched next to Liam. The old Marine's hands were trembling, not from fear but from the electric focus that years of field work had trained into him. He adjusted the radio dial, pushed the transmission button, and growled into the mic. "Coast Guard Astoria, this is Walter Jennings. GPS signal confirmed at Yard Sector E. Unknown personnel possibly inside container, unit marked gray, vented, no serial. Repeat, urgent priority, respond." For a moment, nothing, just static. Then a voice came through, scrambled but audible. "Copy that, Jennings. Signal weak but received. Rescue patrol en route ETA 10 minutes. Confirm subject condition." Walter's eyes flicked toward Buddy, who had now planted himself beside the container, paws braced against the storm, as if guarding a sacred threshold. "Unconfirmed," Walter said, but the dogs locked on. Farther inland, inside a small patrol command cabin perched on a ridge above the harbor, a woman in her late 40s named Commander Leslie Tran stood over a flickering monitor. She was short and stocky, with jet black hair pulled tight in a bun and a sharpness in her voice that had been honed by years in operations. Tran had served 20 years in field coordination for the Coast Guard. She wasn't known for sentimentality, but when the name Walter Jennings came across her desk, she paused. "Jennings," she muttered. "I thought he retired a decade ago." Her second-in-command, Officer Dean Holloway, a tall, sandy-haired man with a serious face and sleeves rolled past his elbows, glanced at her. "You want to verify the signal, ma'am?" "No," she said. "I want to verify the dog." Back in the field, the storm surged. The rain was now a sheet of silver. Buddy barked again, but this time it was followed by something new movement from the container's far side. Two figures appeared in the downpour, silhouettes trudging toward the yard. One of them held an umbrella tilted too far to be casual. The other carried a flashlight low to the ground, not scanning, but hiding. Walter narrowed his eyes. "Those aren't Coast Guard," Liam whispered. "Should we hide?" "No," Walter said, voice low. "We stay still. We observe. We remember." The two men came closer. One was tall, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a long trench coat that flapped in the wind. His companion was thinner, more nervous, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. They stopped near the container where Buddy now stood, unmoving. The taller man cursed under his breath. "The dog's back. We need to move it. Now." Walter's pulse quickened. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small flare gun, more for signaling than defense, but in a pinch, anything could become a weapon. Then, just as the men turned to open the container's lock, a blinding flash of blue and red lit the yard like fireworks. Sirens. A patrol vehicle skidded to a halt 50 feet away. Two officers burst out, weapons drawn, floodlights sweeping. The men at the container froze. Buddy didn't move an inch. Elena, hearing the commotion, fell to her knees and let out a laugh, ragged, exhausted, but joyful. She was still alive. And someone had come. The oxygen inside the container had grown dangerously thin. Elena Brooks lay curled on her side, soaked in sweat, her breath shallow and ragged. Her vision swam with spots, and her limbs felt like sacks of sand. Every inhale was a struggle against the suffocating air. She had stopped shouting long ago, her voice hoarse beyond use, throat dry like scorched cloth. Consciousness came and went in drifting waves, and somewhere between one fading breath and the next, her mind began to let go. Outside, the rain hammered the metal yard with an intensity that made every sound muffled and distorted, but one noise cut through with perfect clarity. A growl, low and unrelenting. Buddy stood rigid before the container, his old frame braced against the wet concrete, lips curled slightly, breath heavy with certainty. He had found her, 13 years old, scarred by past battles, hips worn by time, but his purpose had never been clearer. Walter Jennings stood behind him, coat dripping, one hand shielding Liam from the storm and the approaching floodlights of the Coast Guard vehicles. The boy was trembling, not out of fear, but adrenaline. His green eyes darted between Buddy and the container. "She's in there," Liam whispered, voice barely audible over the storm. I heard something. Where exactly? Walter asked, crouching low. Liam pointed. Right here. I think she said her name. I heard Brooks or something like that. Walter's face tightened. Elena Brooks, that's our missing officer. Behind them, the patrol vehicle's driver door slammed open. A woman stepped out. Lieutenant Ava Morales, mid-30s, tall and lean, with a narrow face, olive skin, and jet black hair tied in a wet braid that slapped against her neck as she jogged through the rain. Morales was known in the Astoria unit as a by-the-book officer with a calm head and precise movements, honed from 6 years in urban disaster response. Her tone was sharp but steady. Show me the container, she ordered. Walter pointed. That one. Buddy's got full lock-on behavior. Morales didn't hesitate. She tapped her shoulder radio. Unit 2, breach tools and bolt cutter to my location. One possible unconscious. EMT standby. Buddy, sensing the shift in urgency, stepped forward, growling louder now. His right paw struck the container's lower panel. Once, then again, each swipe stronger, more frantic. The steel door rattled beneath his weight, and then, from deep inside, a faint thud. Liam froze. There it is again! The rescuers moved into action. 2 officers approached with tools. One of them was Officer Raymond Shaw, a former firefighter in his late 40s, with a thick beard and a quiet manner. Shaw had seen plenty of rescues, but rarely a dog so focused. He's not wrong, he muttered, kneeling beside the door and placing a gloved hand on the cool metal. It's vibrating. As the men positioned the hydraulic jack and prepared to cut through the industrial lock, a flicker of movement caught Walter's eye. A man standing beneath one of the floodlights, just at the edge of the restricted yard. He wore a dock worker's uniform and cap, but his posture was too stiff and his eyes too alert. Walter squinted. Recognition hit like a thunderclap. Dawson! He growled under his breath. Harold Dawson was a mid-50s stevedore with a crooked nose and a limp in his left leg. Years ago, Elena had saved his life after a container slipped from a crane's claw. She had pulled him clear just before the impact. They hadn't spoken much since he was a quiet man, mostly kept to himself. But Walter saw it now, the subtle nod Dawson gave the officer standing at the gate control. In a flash, the gate arm lifted. The security light turned green. Access granted. Walter turned to Morales. That's one of your crew? Morales followed his gaze. Dawson gave her a half-salute gruff, uncertain, and disappeared into the shadows again. Not officially, she murmured, but I think we just got our back door. The door lock snapped under the bolt cutter. Shaw stepped back, nodding once. Ready? Buddy let out a deep, echoing bark that seemed to slice through the thunderclouds themselves. The container door creaked open. Inside, Elena collapsed forward onto the wet concrete. Her body shuddered with the shock of fresh air. She coughed, eyes fluttering open, blinking against the sudden brightness. Morales knelt beside her in seconds, supporting her head. She's alive, Morales called. She's breathing. Walter stepped back and exhaled. Liam let out a breathless cheer, hugging Buddy, who, though exhausted and shaking, let the boy hold him close. Elena, dazed and weak, looked up through blurry vision and saw Buddy. A faint smile touched her cracked lips. Good boy, she whispered. The rain had eased into a drizzle, but the night remained heavy with electricity. The container yard, now flooded with Coast Guard personnel and bright halogen lights, looked like a war zone after the storm. Officers moved swiftly between rows of steel, scanning serial numbers and calling out coordinates, while emergency crews attended to Elena Brooks, now wrapped in a thermal blanket and seated against the tailgate of an open response truck. Her hair was soaked, clinging to her cheeks, and a bruise had bloomed along her jawline, but her eyes, tired, red, and blinking, slowly burned with focus. I can give you everything, she rasped, glancing at Lieutenant Ava Morales, who stood beside her, taking notes on a waterproof clipboard. Take your time, Morales said, her voice softer now. You've been through hell. Elena shook her head. No time. They're still moving shipments. I memorized container tags, truck license plates, even the names they used to sign in fake contractors. One of the drivers had a serpent tattoo on his left hand, black ink. I saw it when he pushed me into the container. There were crates with markings C99, G22, and stencils in Mandarin. This wasn't just weapons. I think they're moving people too. Morales raised an eyebrow. Trafficking? Elena nodded. Definitely. And they're doing it through the reserve yards where retired containers are stored, unscanned and unsigned. Meanwhile, a short distance away, Buddy lay on a thick wool blanket under a pop-up tent. A young female vet knelt beside him, Dr. Andrea Kim, 28, Korean-American, petite and sharp-eyed with black gloves and a med kit slung around her waist. She moved with precise, practiced hands, checking his pulse, joints, and hydration levels. "Vitals are slow but stable," she said, glancing over her shoulder at Walter, who stood with his arms crossed and face hard as weathered bark. His hips are inflamed from strain. He pushed too hard. Walter exhaled, wiping rain from his glasses. He's 13, but his heart's still 20. Andrea smiled faintly. He's got the eyes of a soldier. Next to Buddy, Elena knelt quietly. Her hand brushed his fur, slow and reverent. Her other hand cradled something small and metallic, a dog tag, dulled with age, engraved with an ID number, K90175B, Buddy. "I've seen this before," she murmured, voice breaking. Walter looked down. "How?" She held up the tag, letting it catch the light. "My dad had a photo of a German shepherd with that tag. It was framed on his desk the day he left for his last mission. He said this dog once saved 3 lives in one rescue, pulled a man from a fire in Kuwait. He called him the bravest creature I ever met." Walter's brows lifted. "Martin Brooks?" Elena's gaze snapped up. "You knew him?" "I trained with him," Walter said quietly. "Your father and I served together for 6 months. He was the one who convinced me to retire and settle near Astoria. He said, 'When you're tired of saving the world, go somewhere you can watch it quietly instead.'" Elena's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at Buddy, whose gaze remained locked on hers, calm and knowing. "You saved me, didn't you?" she whispered. "You saved my dad once, and now me." Buddy blinked once, slow and deliberate. On the other side of the lot, the Coast Guard's mobile command unit was a hum of activity. Maps were spread across digital displays. Officers called in serial scans, cross-checking manifest logs with Elena's testimony. Lieutenant Morales stood at the helm, speaking to her team with measured intensity. "We're dealing with high-level trafficking," she said. "All access roads are now under surveillance. I want drones in the air by sunrise. Sector E and Sector K are to be sealed. No outgoing freight without double authentication." Just then, Walter stepped into the tent, his damp jacket removed, revealing a faded uniform shirt beneath. Morales turned. "Jennings," she said, "you still remember how to read container fraud patterns?" Walter smirked slightly. "Only the ones that matter." Morales handed him a tablet. "We need your eye. Elena says the smugglers are using falsified rust patterns and manipulated QR tags to disguise modified containers. Think you can spot them?" Walter took the device. "Give me 30 minutes and a coffee." Morales motioned to one of the junior officers. "Get this man whatever he needs." As Walter joined the digital scan table, Elena remained beside Buddy, her hands still pressed to his side. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Between them, a quiet understanding passed like a thread. The past had curved back toward the present, a loop of service, loyalty, and unbroken instinct. And in that space beneath the echoes of rain, between the hum of generators and distant barking truth, cracked open like sunlight after a storm. The following morning arrived not with sun, but with a cold blue haze that drifted over the harbor, like breath held too long. Mist clung to the boats docked in the bay, their ropes swaying gently with the tide. But, within the Coast Guard Command Center overlooking Astoria's southern pier, the air was sharp and electric. A storm of a different kind now surged through its halls, one of urgency, coordination, and justice long overdue. Inside the operations room, Lieutenant Ava Morales stood before a tactical map populated with red pins and glowing digital markers. Her braid was still damp from the rain, and dark circles under her eyes betrayed a night spent without sleep. Around her, officers typed furiously, answering radio calls, updating manifests, dispatching intercept teams. At her side stood Commander Leslie Tran, her arms folded, posture rigid. Her expression was one of tight-lipped resolve. She had returned from the Newport surveillance outpost after Elena's debriefing had confirmed their worst suspicions. "They're planning an extraction," Morales said, voice low. "Two key targets, alias Bishop and Crawford. They were supposed to slip out at high tide using a private fishing boat registered under a dead company." Tran nodded. "Where?" "Dock 37. They're 30 minutes ahead of our main net, but we've got eyes in the water." At that moment, Petty Officer Dean Holloway leaned in from a side monitor. "Thermal drone just picked up heat signatures at the pier. Boats preparing to depart." Tran didn't wait. "Intercept teams Alpha and Delta move now. Go silent. Full apprehension protocol." At the water's edge, the fog thickened. A weathered fishing boat, Seafarer 2, rocked gently against the dock. Two men stood on board. One was tall, wearing a canvas jacket and a navy baseball cap that shadowed his eyes. He moved with careless confidence, his jaw clenched around an unlit cigarette. This was Bishop, real name unknown, thought to be the architect behind multiple East Coast trafficking routes. Beside him stood Crawford, stockier, slightly older, with a thick neck and a noticeable scar across his right temple. He wore dark jeans and a hooded jacket, his hand resting near a duffel bag too heavy for clothing. His eyes twitched at every sound. "They're late," Crawford muttered. Bishop checked his watch. "Doesn't matter. We move now." Before the engine could hum to life, shadows flickered at the edge of the dock. 3 officers emerged from the fog, silent and swift. Another 2 cut off the rear, guns drawn, voices sharp. "Federal Coast Guard, hands where we can see them." Crawford reached for the duffel, but Bishop didn't move. His hands lifted slowly, smirk unfazed. "Took you long enough." Within seconds, both were in cuffs, the duffel pried open to reveal firearms, false passports, and a small ledger filled with codes and foreign bank accounts. The last threads of the smuggling web had just been pulled, taut, and snapped. By late afternoon, news of the arrest had rippled beyond Astoria. With Elena's first-hand information and evidence recovered from the Seafarer 2, federal task forces had already coordinated with agencies in Texas, New Jersey, and Florida. Containers flagged with the same fake Rust signatures were intercepted before they left port. 2 human trafficking victims were found alive in a warehouse in Baton Rouge. The operation's reach had been deeper than anyone suspected, but now it was unraveling fast. In a quiet room inside the station, Liam O'Connor stood nervously in front of a row of Coast Guard officials. His red hoodie had been traded for a clean collared shirt and slightly wrinkled khakis. His hair was combed for once, and his hands fidgeted with the hem of his sleeve. Lieutenant Morales smiled softly as she stepped forward. "Liam O'Connor, for your quick thinking, bravery, and unwavering determination to help a friend in danger, it is my honor to present you with the Coast Guard Youth Recognition Medal for civilian courage." She pinned a small gold-blue medallion onto his chest. It glinted beneath the room's fluorescent lights. Liam blinked. "Does this mean I'm, like, a junior officer now?" A round of laughter erupted, and Morales knelt to meet his eyes. "It means you were exactly who we needed, at exactly the right moment." Behind him, Buddy sat with perfect posture, tongue lolling slightly, eyes bright as if he too understood the ceremony was for more than one hero. Later that evening, a small gathering was held in the old K9 Memorial Courtyard just outside the command building. A semicircle of stone pillars etched with names of K9 units and handlers lost in service. The newest addition stood draped in a navy cloth. As the crowd of officers, community members, and former servicemen quieted, Commander Tran took the stage. Not all heroes wear uniforms. Some wear fur. Some walk with a limp. And some wait 13 years to make their last mission count. The cloth was pulled back, revealing 2 new engravings. Walter Jennings, K9 Unit Instructor. Uli, Buddy, K9 0175B, the heart that never stopped listening. Elena, dressed in full uniform now, stood at the edge of the gathering. Her eyes shimmered as she looked at Buddy, resting calmly at her feet. Walter approached and stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, gaze fixed on the stone. "You think your dad would have liked this?" he asked quietly. Elena nodded. "He would have saluted." They didn't speak further. They didn't need to. The tide had shifted. Justice, slow and deliberate, had reached the shore. And in the quiet of the setting sun, a sense of closure bloomed, not in vengeance, but in memory honored. The sun crept over the Oregon horizon in golden threads, casting its soft light across the docks of Astoria. The once shadowed coastline now glowed with a gentle warmth that made the worn ropes and rusted cleats shimmer like relics of something sacred. The ocean, no longer roaring, whispered along the shore, a lullaby of return, of safety. At the Coast Guard Training Annex perched above the bay, the newly appointed Field Readiness Unit was beginning its first day. Fresh recruits lined the gravel lot in crisp uniforms, eyes wide with nervous anticipation. Among them stood their new instructor, Elena Brooks, uniform immaculate, posture strong, though her steps carried the subtle weight of someone who had seen both darkness and light. The bruises on her jaw had long since faded, but a quiet intensity remained in her gaze, one that commanded attention not with volume, but with conviction. She paced in front of the line, hands behind her back. "I don't care what grades you had at the academy," she began, her voice clear and grounded. "Out here, in the real world, you don't get a do-over. You get one moment, one instinct, one decision. And if you fail to prepare your mind and heart for that moment, you don't just fail yourself. You fail the people counting on you." The silence that followed was absolute. A soft bark echoed from behind. All eyes turned as Buddy trotted forward, now wearing a blue Coast Guard neckband and a small silver medal on his collar. At 13 and a half, he moved slower than before, one leg dragging ever so slightly from past injury, but his head was high and his ears alert. His presence commanded as much respect as Elena herself. Liam O'Connor followed close behind, now officially part of the department's community engagement program. He wore a polo shirt with the agency logo and carried a clipboard, though it tilted slightly in his hands from habitually chewing on one corner. At 13, Liam had grown in confidence, his posture straighter and steps more deliberate, but he still bore the freckles and curiosity of the boy who once followed a dog into the storm. After the training session, Elena sat on a bench outside the annex, Buddy's head resting on her boot. Liam handed her a coffee, still too hot to drink. "They listen to you like you're some kind of war general," he said, grinning. She chuckled. "They listen to me because Buddy's watching." Liam leaned forward. "You think he knows? That he saved my life twice?" Elena looked down at Buddy, who blinked slowly, his breath steady. "I think he always knew exactly what he was doing." Later that afternoon, a ceremony was held at the Port Amata stage set against the backdrop of the harbor, where fishermen and tug crews paused their day to gather. A brass plaque had been mounted to a smooth basalt stone, flanked by Coast Guard flags fluttering in the breeze. "In honor of service, loyalty, and the will to return, Elena Brooks, Officer, Coast Guard. Liam O'Connor, Civilian Honoree Buddy, K9 075B, faithful to the end." A tall woman took the podium, Mayor Janine Caldwell in her early 50s, statuesque and commanding, with her silver-streaked auburn hair pulled into a low twist and an olive-green wool coat buttoned over her civic sash. She spoke with the gravity of someone who had lived in Astoria all her life. "Sometimes," she said, her voice echoing across the water, "heroes arrive quietly. They don't always wear badges. Some wear collars. Some are young boys with radios. Some are women who refuse to disappear." She gestured toward the trio standing side by side, Elena, Liam, and Buddy. "Their courage reminds us that even when the tide pulls darkest, there is always one more wave of hope. And that loyalty, true loyalty, is not just remembered. It becomes legend." The crowd applauded. Fishermen clapped with thick, calloused hands. A school group waved handmade signs that read, "Thank you, Buddy." And somewhere near the back, Walter Jennings stood in the shade of an old boathouse, arms crossed, pride glowing quietly in his chest. He wore his dress cap, though his hair stuck out wildly beneath it. As the ceremony ended, an older woman approached Elena. Her name was Claire Hanley, a retired librarian in her 70s, small and soft-spoken, with cloud-white hair and large round glasses. She had known Elena's father, Martin Brooks, years before. "I remember your father telling me," Claire said gently, "that if he ever had a daughter, he'd name her after the brightest part of the morning. Looks like he chose right." Elena's eyes welled. She knelt slightly to meet Claire's gaze. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the harbor in molten orange and soft purples, the final moments of the day arrived. Elena stood beside the stone, Buddy at her side, Liam leaning on the railing nearby. Tourists passed and snapped photos. Locals brought flowers, and children whispered, "That's them, the ones from the storm." The story, like all stories that matter, had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer just about a container or a storm, a bark or a whisper. It had become a tale passed from porch to pier, from schoolhouse to fish market. A reminder that sometimes, when you listen close enough, loyalty growls before justice arrives, and when all seems lost, just maybe the light will return. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with trumpets or lightning from the sky. Sometimes they come with 4 tired paws, a boy's brave heart, or a weathered man who still believes in doing what's right. In the darkest moment, when Elena lay hidden and forgotten inside a steel box, it wasn't just training or technology that saved her. It was loyalty, instinct, and perhaps something more. We believe that God often works through the quiet and the ordinary, through a loyal old dog, through a child who listens, through a moment of courage born in silence. And when all hope seems lost, he sends a sign. Not always loud, but always true. Maybe Buddy was more than a dog. Maybe he was a vessel of God's protection, sent one last time to remind us that loyalty never dies, and justice is never too late. In a world that often forgets to notice the good, stories like this pull us back to what matters. So, before you go, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever witnessed a quiet miracle, a small act of courage that changed everything? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe that God still moves among us, in the form of love, loyalty, and second chances, type Amen in the comments. Let this be a prayer not just for the heroes in this story, but for you, that wherever you are, may God bless and protect you. And if you want more stories like this, filled with emotion, redemption, and the incredible bond between humans and animals, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because sometimes all it takes is one story to restore your faith.